Imagine a massive industrial building with pipes, facilities, and high-pressure reactors. Thousands of tons of metal, miles of pipelines, temperatures approaching 500 degrees Celsius. This plant operates around the clock, 7 days a week, consuming colossal amounts of energy, burning natural gas, releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. It produces synthetic ammonia, the foundation of all nitrogen fertilizers on which modern agriculture depends. Now imagine a different factory. It also produces ammonia, converting atmospheric nitrogen into a form that plants can use immediately. But this factory requires not a single watt of electricity. It produces no pollution. It costs not a cent. It operates at room temperature and normal atmospheric pressure. It's the size of a pinhead, a tiny pinkish nodule on the root of an ordinary pea or bean. Inside this nodule live billions of bacteria that do the same thing as the giant chemical plant. They break the triple covalent bond of the nitrogen molecule, the strongest bond in nature, and transform inert gas into life-giving fertilizer. This biological factory has existed on the planet for millions of years. It evolved long before the appearance of humans, long before agriculture, long before chemistry. And modern industrial agriculture almost completely ignores it, preferring to spend billions of dollars on synthetic fertilizers that pollute rivers, destroy soils, and accelerate climate change. Today I will tell you about the most underestimated, forgotten, and ignored technology in the history of agriculture, biological nitrogen fixation. About how microscopic bacteria on the roots of legume plants can replace the multi-billion-dollar chemical fertilizer industry. About how the indigenous peoples of the Americas used this technology for 3,000 years, creating one of the most ingenious agricultural systems in human history. About how all of this was forgotten, erased, thrown onto the scrap heap of history in a single century of industrialization. And about why returning to this ancient wisdom may be the only way to save modern agriculture from ecological and economic collapse. Today we will learn: how can tiny bacteria, invisible to the naked eye, perform a chemical reaction that requires temperatures of hundreds of degrees and pressures of hundreds of atmospheres for industrial plants? Why was the Three Sisters method, corn, beans, squash together, which worked flawlessly for 500 years and fed millions of people, abandoned in a single generation and almost completely forgotten? Is it true that the efficiency of modern nitrogen fertilizers has catastrophically dropped from 80% to a miserable 20%, and that we're losing 70% of everything we apply to the soil, poisoning rivers and the atmosphere? And the most important question: is it even possible to grow high yields without a single gram of synthetic fertilizers, relying only on the symbiosis between plants and bacteria that nature has given us? But before we dive into the history, let's understand the science. Because what happens in these tiny nodules on the roots of legumes is one of the greatest wonders of biology, an elegant dance of symbiosis between two completely different forms of life. Nitrogen is the foundation of life. It's needed to create proteins, from which muscles, enzymes, and antibodies are built. It's needed for DNA, which stores genetic information. It's needed for chlorophyll, the green pigment that captures sunlight and converts it into energy. Without nitrogen, there is no life. And here's a paradox that should amaze the imagination of anyone who thinks about it. The air we breathe is 78% nitrogen. Nitrogen is everywhere around us. In every cubic meter of air there are trillions of nitrogen molecules. We literally swim in an ocean of nitrogen. But plants cannot use it at all. They are surrounded by a vital element but die from its deficiency, like a person dying of thirst in an ocean of salt water. Why? Because the nitrogen molecule, N, has a triple covalent bond between two atoms. This is one of the strongest chemical bonds in nature. To break this bond and convert inert gaseous nitrogen into reactive ammonia that living organisms can use requires colossal energy. Nature has built the perfect fortress. Industry only solved this puzzle at the beginning of the 20th century. The Haber-Bosch process, named after two German chemists, uses an ion catalyst, temperatures of 400 to 500 degrees Celsius, and pressures of 200 to 300 atmospheres to force nitrogen and hydrogen to combine into ammonia. This is one of the most energy-intensive industrial processes on the planet. About 2% of all global energy is spent on nitrogen fertilizer production. But nature solved this problem millions of years ago. And its solution is elegant to the point of genius. There are bacteria, especially from the genus Rhizobium, that possess a unique enzyme, nitrogenase. This molecular complex of proteins and metals is capable of doing what seems impossible: breaking the triple nitrogen bond at ordinary temperature and normal pressure. This is a biological miracle, a molecular machine that works with efficiency unattainable by any human technology. But there's one problem. The operation of nitrogenase requires enormous amounts of energy in the form of ATP, the universal energy currency of all living cells. Bacteria cannot fix nitrogen without a constant supply of energy. They need a source of sugars that they can break down to obtain ATP. And this is where legume plants enter the stage: peas, beans, clover, alfalfa, soybeans, lentils, chickpeas, and hundreds of other species. These plants enter into one of the most elegant symbioses in nature. Here's how it happens, and every detail of this process is like a perfectly choreographed dance at the molecular level. When a legume seed germinates and the root begins to grow in the soil, the plant releases special chemical signals into the environment, flavonoids. These are calling molecules, chemical cries in the darkness of the soil. I'm here. Looking for a partner. In the soil, among billions of other microorganisms, live Rhizobium bacteria. They sense these chemical signals. Their receptors recognize the molecular signature of a specific legume species. Each species has its own flavonoids, its own unique chemical song. The bacteria begin to move toward the signal source, swimming through microscopic channels in the soil. When the bacteria reach the root hairs, the finest outgrowths on the roots, a molecular dialogue begins. The bacteria release nod factors, response molecules to the plant's call. The plant recognizes these molecules and understands. These are friends, these are symbionts, not pathogens. The root hair begins to curl, bend, forming a kind of trap. The bacteria penetrate inside the root through a special infection channel. Inside the root, something amazing happens. The root cells begin to divide, forming a new structure, a nodule, a small pinkish or whitish growth ranging from the size of a pinhead to a pea. Inside this nodule, billions of bacteria live in special membrane vesicles inside plant cells. They don't parasitize, they work. The plant supplies the bacteria with sugars from photosynthesis: glucose, sucrose, malate. This is energy captured from sunlight in the leaves above, transmitted to the roots below ground, delivered directly to the nodules. The bacteria use this energy to operate nitrogenase. The enzyme captures nitrogen molecules from air and soil pores, breaks the triple bonds, converts N into ammonia, NH. The ammonia is transferred to the plant. The plant converts it into amino acids, proteins, chlorophyll, the building blocks of life. This is a mutually beneficial exchange. Pure symbiosis from which both partners benefit. The plant receives nitrogen without needing to extract it from the soil. The bacteria receive a protected home and an unlimited energy source. Everyone wins. And now here's what's striking: the efficiency of this system. 1 hectare of clover can fix from 150 to 300 kilograms of nitrogen per season. Alfalfa, up to 400 kilograms. Peas, beans, from 100 to 200 kilograms. For comparison, farmers typically apply from 100 to 200 kilograms of synthetic nitrogen per hectare for growing corn or wheat. Legumes produce an equivalent amount absolutely free, requiring no fuel, no electricity, no industrial plants. And here's the most beautiful part. When a legume plant dies or when a farmer cuts the above-ground part, the nodules on the roots remain in the soil. They decompose, releasing all the accumulated nitrogen into the soil. The next crop planted in that field after legumes receives this nitrogen as a gift. Natural crop rotation, a system of soil fertility self-regeneration that worked for millions of years before humans invented agriculture. The indigenous peoples of the Americas understood this. Perhaps not at the level of molecular biology, they didn't know about bacteria and nitrogenase. But they knew at the level of observation, experience, the transmission of knowledge through generations. They knew that some plants make the soil better. That if you plant beans together with corn, the corn grows stronger, greener, yields more harvest. And they created one of the most ingenious agricultural systems in human history. It was called Three Sisters. Corn, beans, squashed together in one field, on the same mounds. A system that's about 3,000 years old. Archaeological findings show that by 1070 AD, this system was the dominant form of agriculture in the northeastern part of North America, from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic coast. It was used by at least 15 different indigenous peoples: the Iroquois, Mohawk, Oneida, Seneca, Cayuga, and many others. Imagine a field where nothing grows in rows, as on modern monoculture farms. Instead, you see raised mounds of earth, located about a meter apart from each other. In spring, when the soil warms up, the farmer plants several corn kernels in each mound. 2 to 3 weeks later, when the corn rises 15 to 20 centimeters, beans are planted in the same mounds. Usually this was pole beans, a climbing variety. Simultaneously, squash or pumpkins are planted between the mounds. In a few weeks, the picture changes dramatically. The corn grows tall and strong, its stalks rising 2 to 3 meters. The beans wind around the corn stalks, using them as a living support, a climbing pole. They stretch upward, toward the sun, their leaves intertwining with the corn leaves. And below, at the base of the mounds, the squash spreads out. Huge green leaves the size of plates cover the ground in a solid carpet between the mounds, filling all the space. This looks like chaos, like disorder. But in reality, this is a perfectly tuned system where each element performs several functions simultaneously. Corn provides structure. Its sturdy stalks serve as support for the beans, replacing the trellises or stakes that a modern farmer would have to install. Corn grows quickly, forming the framework for the entire system. Beans fix nitrogen. Their roots are covered with nodules containing bacteria that work around the clock, converting atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia. This nitrogen goes not only to the beans but also to the corn growing in the same mound. The roots are intertwined, the soil is shared, nitrogen is available to all. Corn, an extremely nitrogen-demanding crop, receives it for free from its neighbor. Squash performs several tasks at once. Its huge leaves shade the soil, preventing moisture evaporation, critically important in hot, dry climates. They suppress weed growth, preventing them from competing for water and nutrients. Some squash varieties have prickly or rough stems and leaves that deter raccoons and other pests trying to get to the corn. But the genius of the system isn't only in the above-ground part. Underground, an equally elegant dance occurs. The three plants have different root system depths. Corn, medium-deep roots. Beans, fibrous surface roots with a deep taproot. Squash, a very deep taproot, going down 1 meter to 1.5 meters. They don't compete for water and minerals, each takes resources from its own soil layer. Modern scientific research has confirmed what indigenous peoples knew intuitively. Experiments conducted in recent years in Canada and the USA with the participation of indigenous farmers and agronomic scientists have shown striking results. The Three Sisters system produces 20 to 30% more total yield from the same land area compared to monocultures. If you count calories, protein, nutrients, everything together from 1 hectare yields more than if you planted corn, beans, and squash separately on 3 plots. Pest damage decreases by 55 to 63%. Why? Because diversity confuses insects. Corn pests cannot find host plants in the chaos of smells from beans and squash. A monoculture field is a huge food here. Signal, visible for miles. Mixed planting masks the signal. The soil improves year after year. Organic matter accumulates. Microbiological diversity increases. The system becomes more stable, more resilient to droughts, diseases, weather vagaries. And here's the most beautiful thing from the perspective of human nutrition. On the plate, Three Sisters form a complete diet. Corn provides carbohydrates, energy. Beans provide protein and essential amino acids that aren't in corn. Squash provides vitamins A and C, fats from seeds, fiber. Together they provide balanced nutrition on which one can live without deficiencies. This system fed millions of people for centuries. It was sustainable, self-sufficient, ecological. And it worked without a single gram of synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides. Because they weren't needed. And then everything changed. In a single century of industrialization, all this ancient wisdom, accumulated over millennia, was forgotten, erased, discarded. Let's transport ourselves to the 1840s, to Germany. A chemist named Justus von Liebig publishes revolutionary work. He formulates the law of the minimum. Plant growth is limited by the most efficient element in the soil. If there's enough water in the soil, enough phosphorus, enough potassium, but not enough nitrogen, the plant will grow poorly, limited by nitrogen deficiency. Liebig identifies 3 key elements of plant nutrition. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, the famous NPK formula that you see on every bag of fertilizer today. This was a revolution in understanding agronomy. Suddenly, agriculture transformed from an art based on experience and intuition into a science based on chemistry. If there's not enough nitrogen in the soil, add nitrogen. If there's not enough phosphorus, add phosphorus. Simple logic, right? Farmers began using mineral fertilizers. At first, these were natural sources: guano, seabird droppings from islands off the coast of Peru, natural saltpeter from Chilean deserts, ground animal bones as a source of phosphorus. This worked. Yields grew. Chemistry showed its power. But the real turning point came at the beginning of the 20th century. 1908 to 1909. German chemists Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch develop an industrial process for synthesizing ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen and hydrogen. The process requires an ion catalyst, temperatures of 400 to 500 degrees, and pressures of 200 to 300 atmospheres. But it works. For the first time in history, humanity learned to fix atmospheric nitrogen on an industrial scale. This was the greatest achievement of 20th century chemistry. The Haber-Bosch process literally feeds half of humanity today. Without synthetic fertilizers, modern yields would be impossible, and the planet's population couldn't have grown from 2 billion in 1920 to 8 billion today. But every revolution has a price. By the 1950s to 1970s, the so-called Green Revolution began. New high-yielding varieties of wheat, rice, and corn were developed. These varieties could produce yields 2 to 3 times higher than traditional ones. But they were extremely demanding in terms of nutrition. They needed huge doses of nitrogen fertilizers to realize their potential. Monocultures displaced traditional mixed plantings and crop rotations. Why plant 3 sisters when you can sow an entire field with one high-yielding corn variety, douse it with fertilizers, and get a record harvest? The economic logic was inexorable. Specialization, scale, efficiency. Legume crops transformed from partners into competitors for land. Why plant clover or alfalfa when you can plant more corn and earn more money? Crop rotation shortened or disappeared completely. Fields became monotonous green rectangles of a single crop, stretching to the horizon. And here's where the tragedy begins at the biological level. When you apply synthetic nitrogen to the soil, the plant receives a simple signal. Nitrogen is available in abundance right now, immediately, for free. Why spend precious energy maintaining symbiosis with bacteria, forming nodules, feeding bacteria with sugars, if nitrogen can simply be absorbed by roots from the soil solution? The plant, like a rational economic agent, chooses the cheaper path. It literally turns off the nodule formation mechanism, suppresses symbiosis. This is scientifically proven. Excess available nitrogen in the soil suppresses nitrogenase activity in nodules, reduces the number of nodules on roots, and ultimately leads to complete cessation of symbiosis. Legumes grown in fields with high doses of synthetic fertilizers almost don't fix nitrogen. Why should they, if it's already there? But this is only the beginning. Breeders developed new high-yielding varieties under conditions of high fertilizer doses. All trials, all breeding were conducted in fields generously fertilized with synthetic NPK. Natural selection worked under these conditions. Varieties that better utilized available nitrogen from fertilizers gained an advantage. Varieties that spent energy on symbiosis with bacteria lost the competition. It was an unnecessary waste of resources. Result: over several decades, modern crop varieties gradually lost the ability for effective symbiosis. Not completely, but significantly. They became dependent on synthetic fertilizers. This is evolution in action, but evolution in the wrong direction. 3 sisters disappeared. Companion planting, the joint planting of complementary crops, became an exotic practice for organic farming enthusiasts, a quirk incompatible with modern industrial agriculture. And for decades, everything looked wonderful. Yields grew. Food became more abundant. Prices fell. It seemed that chemistry had solved humanity's food problem. But beneath the surface, problems were accumulating. And now prepare for shocking numbers, because what's happening with nitrogen fertilizer efficiency is a quiet catastrophe that almost no one talks about. In the 1960s, at the dawn of the Green Revolution, nitrogen fertilizer use efficiency was about 80%. This means that if a farmer applied 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, approximately 80 kilograms were absorbed by plants and converted into harvest. 20 kilograms were lost, acceptable losses. Today, according to numerous scientific studies, global nitrogen fertilizer use efficiency has dropped to 20%. 20%. This means that out of 100 kilograms of applied nitrogen, only 20 kilograms are absorbed by plants. 80 kilograms, 80%, are lost. Where do they go? Part is leached into groundwater as nitrates, polluting drinking water sources. Part flows into rivers and lakes, causing eutrophication, explosive algae growth that consumes all oxygen, creating dead zones where fish cannot live. In the Gulf of Mexico off the US coast, there's a dead zone the size of New Jersey, caused by nitrogen fertilizer runoff from Midwest fields. Part of the nitrogen evaporates as ammonia, polluting the air. Part converts into nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas 300 times more powerful than carbon dioxide, which accelerates climate change. Why has efficiency so catastrophically fallen? Because intensive farming with monocultures and massive doses of chemicals has destroyed the soil ecosystem. Soil is not just a mineral substrate, it's a living organism populated by trillions of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes. These organisms regulate the nitrogen cycle, retain it in the soil in organic forms, slowly release it for plants. When you year after year flood the soil with synthetic fertilizers without adding organic matter, without using crop rotation, without giving the land rest, the microbiology dies. The soil becomes a dead substrate incapable of retaining nutrients. Nitrification, the process of converting ammonia into nitrates, accelerates fivefold. Nitrates are extremely mobile, they don't bind to soil, are easily washed away by the first rain. Fertilizers that the farmer paid money for go into rivers without bringing benefit. And here's the tragic irony. The more fertilizers we apply, the more we lose them, the more we destroy the soil, the more fertilizers we need next year. A vicious circle. Dependency. Farmers around the world are trapped. They spend more and more money on fertilizers, getting less and less return. In developing countries, where farmers cannot afford expensive fertilizers, yields are low, soils are exhausted. In developed countries, excess fertilizers create an ecological crisis, water pollution, air pollution, acceleration of climate change. And all this time, the solution existed. It worked for millions of years. It lay right before us, in nodules on the roots of legumes, in the ancient wisdom of the three sisters, in the symbiosis of plants and bacteria. But the economic logic of industrial agriculture is built on selling products. Free biological solutions don't bring profit to chemical companies. No money is spent on their marketing, promotion, lobbying. Information about them wasn't maliciously suppressed, it was simply ignored because it didn't fit the business model. But in recent years, something is beginning to change. Scientific studies are appearing that reconsider old truths. Farmers, crushed by growing fertilizer costs, are seeking alternatives. The ecological crisis is becoming too obvious to ignore. And suddenly biological nitrogen fixation is back in the spotlight. In 2021, a large-scale meta-analysis was published, a study that combined data from thousands of experimental farms around the world. Scientists analyzed the impact of including legume crops in rotations on yield, fertilizer use, environmental indicators. The results are striking. Including legume crops in rotation allows reducing the need for synthetic nitrogen fertilizers from 140 kilograms per hectare, the world average rate, to 100 kilograms, a 30% reduction, without losing yield in subsequent crops. Moreover, legumes work best at low and moderate doses of synthetic fertilizers. At high doses, their effect is negated because plants turn off symbiosis. But at moderate doses, synergy is achieved. Legumes fix nitrogen, a small dose of fertilizer covers peak needs, and the harvest is maximum at minimum cost. Farmers are beginning to apply this in practice. Crop rotations are returning. A classic example: corn, soybeans, wheat. Soybeans, a legume crop, restore nitrogen in the soil after corn. Wheat sown after soybeans receives nitrogen for free. Cover crops between main seasons. In autumn, after corn harvest, the farmer sows clover or vetch, fast-growing legumes. They grow in autumn and spring, fix nitrogen, protect soil from erosion. In spring, they are plowed into the soil as green manure. Nitrogen remains in the field. Intercropping, simultaneous cultivation of two crops. Modern versions of three sisters. Experiments in Canada and the USA conducted jointly with indigenous farmers and agronomic scientists show that the system works today. Yes, it requires more manual labor. Yes, it's difficult to fully mechanize. But on small farms focused on sustainability rather than maximum scale, it gives excellent results. In tropical regions, agroforestry is being revived, growing crops under the canopy of nitrogen-fixing trees. Acacia, albizia, gliricidia. The trees fix nitrogen, their leaves fall to the ground as mulch and fertilizer. Under their shade grow coffee, cocoa, bananas, crops that love light shade. The system restores degraded soils, increases biodiversity, provides stable income. Scientists are working on genetic improvement of symbiosis, not through GMOs, but through traditional breeding. They select legume varieties that efficiently fix nitrogen even in non-ideal conditions. They research the possibility of transferring the ability for symbiosis to non-legume crops, wheat, rice, corn. This is a long-term project, but the potential is enormous. Biological nitrogen fixation is not a conspiracy theory and not a suppressed technology. It's a natural system that has existed for millions of years, that traditional farmers used for millennia, and that we almost forgot in 100 years of industrial agriculture. No one buried this information maliciously. It's just that the economic model of modern agriculture is built on selling products, seeds, fertilizers, pesticides. Free biological solutions didn't fit this model. No money was spent on research, marketing, promotion for them. They ended up on the sidelines of progress not because they didn't work, but because they didn't bring profit to those who controlled research budgets and educational programs. But today, when fertilizer costs are rising, when the ecological crisis is becoming undeniable, when soils are degrading and yields stop growing despite more and more chemistry, returning to biology is becoming not a romantic quirk, but an economic necessity. This is not a rejection of progress. This is not a return to the Stone Age. This is a connection of the best of both worlds. The ancient wisdom of traditional farmers who observed nature and learned from it, and modern science that understands molecular mechanisms and can optimize systems. Lower costs. Less pollution. Healthier soils. More sustainable yields. This is not utopia, it's possible, it's proven, it's working right now on thousands of farms around the world. Plants and bacteria agreed on cooperation millions of years ago. They invented a way to turn air into fertilizer at room temperature, without industrial plants, without greenhouse gas emissions. All we need to do is not interfere with their work. Give them space. Return them to our fields. Sometimes the most advanced technologies are those we've forgotten. Have you ever grown legumes? Have you noticed the small pink nodules on the roots of peas or beans? Have you tried companion planting, planted different crops together, watching how they help each other? Share your experience in the comments. Let's learn from nature together.